Animal rights activists in Australia could face up to a year in jail for trespassing. They're accused of breaking into farms and slaughterhouses last week, stealing animals and chaining themselves to machinery to fight against animal cruelty. The protests have divided Australia, a country where barbecue is big business, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison has even gone so far as to call the demonstrators un-Australian. Well, let's discuss this with James Aspey. He's an Australian animal rights activist and former parliamentary candidate for the Animal Justice Party. So, James, you've annoyed the Prime Minister enough for him to go to the extent to call you green-collared criminals, shameful, un-Australian. With all of that in mind, has this vegan vigilantism been justified? Do you feel that you're on the right track?
100%. I think that the animal rights movement is on track. We're seeing huge changes in trends regarding vegan food products, searches on Google. We're finally starting a conversation about animal rights, and that's what needs to happen, because most people never chose to eat meat or dairy or eggs and support all the violence and suffering inside factory farms and slaughterhouses. Instead, they were just born into a culture that does it because that's what they do. And once it may have been necessary to consume animal products, but in 2019, it is 100% not. We know that from the science and studies, and we know that from having technology to create so much delicious food and also to feed the world with plant-based food so we could end so much suffering. And that's what this action has kept up with the conversation. It's got the conversation started in a big way. For the first time, people are able to make a choice because they realize there's a choice to make. Do I want to support violence and oppression and animal slavery and stabbing animals in the throat? Or do I want to just change all that, move to a better system of eating plants and not breeding animals into existence for the sole purpose of murdering them?
Goat farmers are saying you harass them and bully them. Would you consider your movement to be at war with farmers?
Not at all. Farmers are an integral part of bringing food to us all, and we're very grateful for that. We love farmers. We just don't love animal farming. Farm plants, there's tens of thousands of plants that that can be eaten, and we only eat a fraction of them. There's so much demand growing for vegan food, for plant-based foods through plant-based milks and different vegan meats and all the grain and all these different things, that animal farming is just totally unnecessary. So it's not a war against farmers in particular. It's a war, or it's a battle against the enslavement of these sentient beings, these vulnerable, innocent beings who are born into a life of, they're not free, and they are forced to do what we want them to do. And, unfortunately, we have to do the right thing. And sometimes that means raiding farms because we need to speak up for the victims. And that is the animals.
And so there's the farm raids and there's the shutdowns and stopping traffic and so on. Despite all of that, as we heard, the Prime Minister calling you some colorful names, and it seems as if the government is wholeheartedly on the side of the animal farmers for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, and so on. So what would your next move then be, given that the government's not listening?
Keep it up, be consistent. They'll have to listen at some point, and I think that's what is actually happening. Everybody is starting to take notice of the animal rights movement. It's an issue that's becoming it's coming to the mainstream, and it's at the forefront of a lot of people's thoughts and conversations and in the media, and that's the whole point. So regardless of what one man who has some power in Australia said about us, and whatever side he's on in particular, I don't expect him to understand or agree, because he's probably paying for these animals to be killed by buying meat and buying dairy and buying eggs. He's coming from a very biased position. If you think about it from the victim's point of view, that removes all biases. Would this Prime Minister like to trade places with any of these animals? What would he feel if it was him being forced down the line at the slaughterhouse? It becomes very obvious what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, culturally, this runs deep. Your very use of the word victim might be a sore point for some people, because they might feel, well, I don't know if you can call these animals a victim, right? And as the conversation starts through your actions and the debates that people will have, if you prove to people that, hey, this factory farming is terrible, the slaughterhouse conditions are horrendous, but they come back to you and say, yeah, I don't like that. It makes me feel very icky that there's a sort of animal holocaust happening every day for my hamburger. But I want better conditions for these animals, but I still want them killed and I still want to eat them. Would that be, I guess, a stepping stone towards something that you might support?
It could be, I support less suffering. So, of course, it would be better not to torture these animal slaves before they get murdered. But a lesser of two evils is still evil. What if we were talking about human slavery? Would it be enough to just make their living spaces more comfortable and to play music while they're doing the work they're forced to do? No.
Right.
Would that be better? Maybe they'd enjoy that a little bit more, but slavery is wrong and violence is wrong. And the point is that this is unnecessary now. It's completely needless. It doesn't have to happen. So I support all the steps whatever it takes to get to the final goal of abolishing animal exploitation, but only purely from a strategic point do I think that you can stop anywhere along the way where we are still doing this in a nice way. No, I don't think there's a nice way to kill somebody who doesn't want to die. And people can call it humane slaughter or a humane holocaust if they want, but the word humane means to show compassion, and there's nothing compassionate about killing animals. Even if they did it in a way where they didn't feel it and didn't see it coming, they're still taking their life against their will. If we killed a human in a way where they didn't feel it or didn't see it coming, but it was against their will, it's still murder. And, you suffer the consequences of committing an act like that. Unfortunately, when it comes to animals, they can't represent themselves. So it's up to humans who see the injustice in this, and a lot of people are starting to realize the injustice in this, to speak on their behalf and to try to explain how horrific it is that currently we are holocausting 74 billion 74 billion land animals and 2.7 trillion sea animals, and every single one of these individuals is an animal just like a human animal. They feel pain, they suffer, they want to live, they don't want to die. They are just fellow earthlings who are trying to make the best of whatever situation.
And that's a discussion that I'd like to invite you back on the show to have, because it might be interesting for a panel, right, to discuss the point of animal suffering, because I think a lot of people still don't get that animals do suffer, and they have this idea that they're just kind of zombies that are there for the killing and there for meat. James, good to have you on the program. Looking forward to having you back on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us.